Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and this is Voice of the Global South. All right then, let's get started. On the show this week, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffers damage, raises fears of a 1986-like disaster as Trump pushes for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Is China weaponizing fentanyl, the nuclear weapon of drugs? We delve deeper into China's asymmetric warfare against the US. And watch exclusively on our YouTube channel how Modi and Trump revive their special bond. All that and much, much more coming up on Voice of the Global South. Chernobyl has been attacked. Who was behind it is not clear. On Friday, a drone armed with a warhead struck the protective outer shell of Ukraine's Chernobyl nuclear power plant, briefly causing a fire and damaging the structure. Ukraine blames Russia for it, but the Kremlin denies all involvement. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant is located near Ukraine's border with Belarus. Chernobyl was the site of a nuclear accident in the year 1986. To this day, it remains the worst disaster in the history of nuclear power generation. The plant has remained closed since then. The UN nuclear watchdog says radiation levels at the site have not gone up. Also, the inner containment shell of the plant was not breached. The incident has given rise to renewed fears of a nuclear catastrophe. Zelensky posted an image on X that appears to show the damage to the giant shield made of concrete and steel, which covers the remains of the reactor that lost its roof in the incident. He claims that the attack shows that Russia is not preparing for peace talks. Now, this after Zelensky made another startling claim aimed at ending the fighting, a move that could change the course of the 3-year-old conflict. Zelensky has said that Ukraine is ready for peace talks with Russia. He's even suggested that he might be open to a land swap, particularly in the Kursk region, which Ukraine seized in a surprise offensive last year. This marks a significant departure from his previous stance of not ceding any land seized by Russia. It's a daring move, no doubt, but Zelensky has also been clear about the importance of international support. He acknowledged that Ukraine cannot ensure its security simply with the help of its European partners. He has said that security guarantees without the US are not real security guarantees. The rather pointed comment underscores the US's crucial role in any lasting peace agreement. It fits into the belief that at the end of the day, the Ukraine conflict has as much to do with a decades-old rivalry between the US and Russia as it does with the Russia-Ukraine tensions. Trump spoke with both Putin and Zelensky on 12 February. He spoke about his desire to bring an end to the conflict. Trump said, "It is time to stop this ridiculous war where there's been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction." He believes that both Russia and Ukraine are ready to negotiate an end to the conflict. Trump's call with Putin lasted more than 1 hour. Trump discussed about a potential ceasefire.
And the president released a statement following that conversation in great detail. I can also confirm that the president just recently got off the phone with President Zelensky of Ukraine. His truth is as follows. I just spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace. We discussed a variety of topics having to do with the war, but mostly the meeting that is being set up on Friday in Munich, where Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the delegation. I am hopeful that the results of that meeting will be positive. It is time to stop this ridiculous war where there has been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction. God bless the people of Russia and Ukraine. I myself just spoke to the president about these calls, and he told me to tell all of you they were very good calls, they were very positive, and the administration is wholeheartedly committed to a peace deal to end once and for all the Russia-Ukraine war.
So what does all this really mean for the future of the Ukraine conflict? How will the US handle the delicate negotiations? Now, Trump seems to be counting on Putin to deliver on peace in Ukraine, especially after the Russian leader released a US prisoner, Mark Fogel, who was held by Moscow since 2021. The White House called it a quote-unquote goodwill gesture. Already, some believe that it could be a sign that negotiations to end the Ukraine conflict are gaining momentum. Zelensky's openness to negotiating a land swap is one of the clearest signals yet that Ukraine may be willing to consider compromises that were previously unthinkable. In a social media post, Zelensky thanked Trump for his interest in peace and his continued support to Ukraine. As for Putin, he has stressed on the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and also expressed a willingness to work towards sustainable peace. In fact, Putin even invited Trump to visit Moscow, marking another potential breakthrough in their relationship. And so the world waits. What will happen next? Will Ukraine and Russia make difficult compromises in the interest of peace? Can the US, under Trump's leadership, mediate a ceasefire? One thing's for sure, this conflict is far from over, but the possibility of peace may finally be within reach. Right, moving on. At the center of a trade war between the US and China is a chemical called fentanyl. It has claimed so many lives in the US that some are calling it a weapon of mass destruction, the nuclear weapon of drugs, and not without reason. In 2023, fentanyl overdose caused 74,721 deaths. That's an average of 200 deaths per day. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death among people between the ages of 18 and 45 in the US. Here's another statistic for you. The US seized 10 tons of fentanyl in 2024. Nearly all of it was confiscated from the US states bordering Mexico. Now, the US, Mexico, and China are three nations that are at the heart of an illicit fentanyl trade. The US is the world's largest consumer, Mexico the largest manufacturer, and China the largest raw materials supplier. Trump is now using the fentanyl crisis as justification for slapping tariffs on goods from China. He imposed similar tariffs on Mexico and Canada too for not doing enough to tackle the problem. The tariffs were put on hold for 30 days after Mexico and Canada pledged to bolster border security. But a 10% tariff on goods from China took effect in early February.
Thinking about something because they're sending fentanyl into our country, and because of that, they're causing us hundreds of thousands of deaths. So China is going to end up paying a tariff also for that, and we're in the process of doing that. We'll make that determination what it's going to be, but China has to stop sending fentanyl into our country and killing our people.
Fentanyl is a synthetic drug. It was developed by a chemist, Paul Janssen, in Belgium in the 1960s as an anesthetic. It can legally be prescribed in formal medical settings to relieve severe pain, and it is still widely used in hospitals to ease surgical pain. It's administered in three ways: injection, patch, or lozenge. Like heroin, fentanyl delivers a euphoric high. It is 50 times more powerful than heroin. and 100 times more powerful than morphine. But its overdose can cause fatal respiratory failure. Just 2 milligrams of fentanyl, just 2, the size of a snowflake or a few grains of salt, can prove lethal. Fentanyl first found its way into the US in the 1970s, but the real explosion came in the 2010s on the back of an epidemic abuse of prescription painkillers. And after the US made it tougher for doctors to prescribe these medicines, some users turned to illicit fentanyl.
Seem to talk about it as if, drug trafficking organizations south of the border launch missiles into the United States that explode and release fentanyl into the air that then goes, looking around for people to go into and kill. That's what they say. They're sending fentanyl in the air. They're poisoning our country. No, we have drug prohibition. And just like with alcohol prohibition, as long as there's a market and there are people who want to buy it, the market is going to be met.
What sets fentanyl apart from other synthetic drugs is that it's easier and cheaper to produce. There's no need for vast tracts of land to grow crops, as is the case with cocaine, which is made from coca leaves, or heroin, which is derived from opium poppies. Compared to the synthetic drug meth, fentanyl is safer and simpler to produce and requires smaller amounts of chemicals. The US opioid crisis has developed in waves over decades. The first wave of the opioid overdose epidemic started in the 1990s with the abuse of prescription opioids. The second wave started in 2010 with a rapid increase in overdoses involving heroin. And the third wave surged during the COVID-19 pandemic. There were 115,000 overdose deaths in 1 year, and fentanyl was responsible for 2/3 of those deaths.
It spiked during the COVID pandemic, along with alcohol use and other substance uses. A lot of factors involved there, including the fact that because of border closures and supply chain issues, it was difficult to grow and ship opium, which is processed into heroin. So the drug trafficking organizations switched out to fentanyl, which they could synthesize easily in the lab. And fentanyl is much more potent and potentially deadly than heroin. So that also contributed to the spike. Now that the pandemic has passed, we're starting to see an ebb in the overdose death rate. We're also starting to see a return of heroin into the drug supply. So that may also be contributing.
US officials believe that a fourth wave of the opioid epidemic is now underway. Now, they accuse Beijing of turning a blind eye to the deadly fentanyl trade and possibly weaponizing it in prosecuting an asymmetric warfare against the US. The US Drug Enforcement Agency accuses China of being the main source of all fentanyl-related substances trafficked into the US. A former US Attorney General, Merrick Garland, says the global fentanyl supply chain, which ends with the deaths of Americans, often starts with chemical companies in China. But China denies all responsibility. It calls it America's problem. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson says its root cause lies within the US itself. At first, street fentanyl was made in China and sold through so-called dark web marketplaces. When Chinese fentanyl exports dried up in 2019 after Beijing's crackdown, drug cartels in Mexico took over the manufacturing of the finished product. Now, Chinese chemical producers supply these cartels with raw materials via courier services or cargo ships. Upon reaching Mexico, they are then made into fentanyl and smuggled into the US. The modus operandi of the traffickers and smugglers was simple. Chinese suppliers used a US duty-free provision to export chemical materials for fentanyl by disguising them as gadgets and other low-cost goods. The shippers successfully mislabeled the packages as electronics. Now, only a tiny fraction of the nearly 4 million parcels arriving on US shores daily are inspected by the US Customs. So it made it easy for Mexican traffickers to sneak in small boxes of fentanyl ingredients from China disguised as mundane household items. Even modest amounts of these chemicals, known as precursors, can produce a vast number of pills. Traffickers then route these precursors to Mexico. There, powerful crime syndicates such as the Sinaloa cartel use the chemicals to manufacture industrial quantities of fentanyl. The finished product is smuggled to the US, where it is powering the biggest drug crisis in US history. Recently, Mexico uncovered a suspected synthetic drugs laboratory in the violence-ridden state of Sinaloa. The Sinaloa cartel, one of Mexico's biggest drug trafficking organizations, was built on cocaine smuggling. But over the past decade, it has switched to fueling the U.S. opioid addiction. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration said in June that the gang was largely responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the country over the past 8 years. Infighting among the cartel, one of the world's biggest, has left hundreds of people dead since September in Sinaloa. Now, Trump has since plugged at least one loophole. The new U.S. tariff orders against Canada, Mexico and China all contain clauses suspending the duty-free exemption for low-value shipments. The removal of the duty exemption for packages valued at less than $800 aims to stop the flow of fentanyl and precursor chemicals into the U.S. Now, Trump has paused the tariffs until 1st March after some concessions from Mexico and Canada. For instance, Mexico has pledged to deploy 10,000 more soldiers to the border. Canada, in turn, was deploying new technology and personnel to curb illicit fentanyl trade. But both Mexico and Canada balk at being held responsible for U.S.'s fentanyl problem. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has urged the U.S. to do its part.
There is an important part that they must play in their country. What's the final distribution on the streets? Aren't there cartels there or organized crime? We collaborate, coordinate, we meet and work together. But we will always defend our sovereignty. So there's an important part that they must play there, a very important part.
Sheinbaum's comment resonates with the Mexican people, some of whom share her sentiment. This man, for instance, accuses the U.S. Army and gun industry of arming the very Mexican drug cartels that push illicit fentanyl into the U.S.
I think Trump's position on fentanyl trafficking is absurd. The US Army is the Mexican cartel's main provider of guns. I think it's absurd. They are not attacking the root of the problems.
Similarly, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada says less than 1% of fentanyl in the US comes from Canada. So why blame us, he asks. His Public Safety Minister David McGuinty complains that fentanyl is killing more people per capita in Canada than the US, so it is a shared burden.
Fentanyl is a foreign affairs issue. It's a law enforcement issue. It's an intelligence issue. It's a public health issue. This is a two-way street. And the fentanyl crisis is particularly egregious because fentanyl is so lethal. It's lethal in Canada and it's lethal in the United States. And I made sure to remind White House officials that in some cases, some weeks, some days, on per capita population, we're losing more Canadians than Americans are losing Americans. That's an important stat for the Americans to understand. We are connected with this crisis.
Right, let me leave you with an interesting piece of information. Did you know that the method adopted by drug cartels to manufacture fentanyl was discovered by scientists in India? A team of Indian scientists was tasked with finding a simplified method of producing the surgical analgesic to help treat battlefield injuries. In 2005, the team published a streamlined process for synthesizing fentanyl. The procedure is known as the Gupta method, named after the main author of the paper, Pradeep Kumar Gupta. The Gupta method called for just 3 steps and no specialized lab equipment. And since then, illicit fentanyl makers have embraced the technique. and put their own spins on it. Descriptions of the process are now widely available online. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently concluded his trip to the US, where the two leaders discussed about spectrum of critical issues: trade, defense, energy and regional security. Here's the report.
Over 2 days of power-packed meetings, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump tackled a spectrum of critical issues: trade, defense, energy and regional security. And in a moment that electrified the audience, Prime Minister Modi adapted President Trump's Make America Great Again into India's own vision of Developed India 2047. The takeaway, a mega partnership for prosperity.
Make India Great Again, यानी मेगा। जब अमेरिका और भारत साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं, यानी मागा। मागा प्लस मीगा तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप फॉर प्रॉस्पेरिटी।
The two leaders set their sights on a $500 billion trade volume by 2030. From technology transfer to joint production, this partnership is opening doors for a new era of industrial and economic collaboration. A series of agreements signed during this visit lay the foundation for a deep-rooted cooperation spanning emerging technologies, clean energy and infrastructure development. And when it comes to defense, India is stepping up like never before. The US has green-lighted the sale of F-35 stealth fighter jets to India, propelling the nation into an elite club of military might. In a major push for energy security, India is set to purchase up to $25 billion worth of US energy, fueling not just its industries but also its vision for a self-reliant future. This move is a game-changer for reducing trade imbalances and strengthening energy ties. LNG supplies, renewable energy collaboration, and cutting-edge research in hydrogen fuel technology are now at the forefront of India's energy transformation. On global diplomacy, India's voice is getting louder. Prime Minister Modi reiterated that India is not neutral in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It firmly stands on the side of peace.
बहुत से लोगों का एक भ्रम है कि भारत न्यूट्रल है। मैं साफ करना चाहता हूं, भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है। हमारा अपना एक पक्ष है और हमारा पक्ष है शांति, पीस।
His firm stand aligns itself with India's belief that a solution cannot be found on the battlefield but rather on the negotiating table. The United States has approved the extradition of 2611 Mumbai attacks accused Tawahur Rana, ensuring that he faces trial on Indian soil. This marks a significant step in India's unyielding fight against terrorism. Additionally, India and the US have pledged stronger intelligence sharing mechanisms and counter-terrorism operations, ensuring a safer world for future generations.
आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और अमेरिका दृढ़ता से साथ खड़े रहे। हम सहमत हैं कि सीमा पार आतंकवाद के उन्मूलन के लिए ठोस कार्रवाई आवश्यक है और मैं राष्ट्रपति जी का आभारी हूं। उन्होंने 2008 के जिसने भारत में नरसंहार किया था, उस मुजरिम को अब भारत के हवाले करने का निर्णय किया है।
Trump offered to help India resolve its border dispute with China, even as he sought to boost cooperation with India in the Indo-Pacific region.
I look at India, I do see the skirmishes on the border, which are quite vicious, and I guess they continue to go on. If I could be of help, I'd love to help because that should be stopped. That's been going on for a long time, and it's quite violent. It's quite violent, but I would hope that China and India and Russia and US and all of us can get along.
Prime Minister Modi invited President Trump to the upcoming Quad Leaders Summit in India, further solidifying India's leadership in the Indo-Pacific and strengthening strategic collaborations. As the curtains fall on the high-stakes visit, one thing is certain: India is not just participating in global affairs, it is leading them. Make India Great Again is more than a vision. It's reality in motion. With robust alliances, ambitious targets, and a clear roadmap, India is shaping the future of the 21st century. India is rising and the world is watching. Ragini Sudhir Shore for DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.